This is Gene Krebs.
Hi there. Oh. Whoop. Whoosh.
And we're high on Ohio.
We're going around this great state. We're talking to people who know how things work and having an influence over how things are working. It's my great pleasure today to be joined by Dr. Kristi Williams of Ohio State, where you're an associate professor in the Department of Sociology. And you've come out with some very interesting, almost counterintuitive research on the interaction between families and poverty. But before we go into that, the young people are always fascinated a little bit. So how did you fetch up, you're from Texas, not much of an accent there, but you are from Texas. So how did you fetch up here in Ohio? What brought you to Columbus?
The physician at Ohio State University brought me to Columbus, but more generally, I grew up in a very small town in rural Texas. My grandfather was a rancher. First-generation college student, so
okay.
And in undergrad, I majored in business because, you know, I always thought if you're going to go to college, what's the reason for going to college is to get a job and make money. So
okay.
I majored in business, and no offense to any business people out there, but I did not find that that was for me. So I ended up getting a degree in business and then went on to graduate school sort of serendipitously. I was working and really wanted just to take some classes to sort of further my knowledge. And
okay.
The classes that happened to be available in the evening were sociology classes. So I went into took some graduate level sociology classes, discovered that, hey, I'm pretty good at this, I like
okay.
it. And ended up getting into a PhD program at the University of Texas in sociology. And then, found the job here.
Well, you've carved out a name for yourself recently with a recent analysis. Would you like talking to us a little bit about that?
Yes, well, much of my work in the past has focused on marriage and health, so the average benefits of marriage for individuals' mental and physical health. And it appears that there are benefits of marriage for mental and physical health. And along the way, I started seeing some of my work turn up in policy briefs and arguments in support of so-called healthy marriage initiatives. And these are programs that were instituted in conjunction with the 1996 welfare reform. And the goal of them is to encourage and promote marriage among low-income single mothers. And so the argument is that, we know that marriage is good for people on average. It's
okay.
good for children. And we know that non-marital fertility is on the rise and is also correlated with poverty. And so if we can, the sort of overly simplistic view is that if we can encourage low-income single mothers to marry, then maybe this will solve some of the problems.
That will cure poverty.
That will be a cure for poverty. And so, so I started seeing my own research showing up in support of some of these policies, saying, look, marriage is a good thing, and it really made me think, well, perhaps single mothers will benefit from marriage and their children to the same extent that the average person does, but that's really an empirical question that we haven't looked at. No one had really looked at that, and there were a lot of reasons to think that single mothers would not benefit from marriage in the same way that the average person does.
So basically the question is, because you're poor and single and having children out of wedlock, is that the cause of your poverty? Or basically if you were instead have become married, you never would have experienced poverty?
Right. That's the basic question. Is marriage a cause of, or lack of marriage a cause of poverty, or is it really that poverty is a deterrent to having a healthy and lasting marriage?
So what's the answer?
Well, I don't think I can, I think that is the million-dollar question.
We're on TV. We're supposed to do simple, facile answers here.
Well, I think there are a couple of things that go into answering that question. First of all, we know that there are a lot of poor people who are married. Okay. Being married does not exclude you from living in poverty. But we also, what my research has looked at, and I tend to focus on mental and physical health outcomes, as well as some educational outcomes for children. And what I found is that among children who were born to single mothers, if their mother subsequently marries, that really not have many benefits for
No impact then.
for their health, right, for their health and well-being, or for the health and well-being of women, the single mothers themselves.
Okay.
Marriage appears to have few benefits. You know, we also know that, I mean, there are a lot of reasons why poverty is a deterrent to having a strong and lasting relationship. You know, economic strain is a major cause of couple disagreement. But the other factor, I think, that's really more of a broad macro factor is that in many low-income, particularly African-American low-income communities, there is a shortage of men to marry. You know,
Why?
Mass incarceration. African-American men have higher mortality rates, so they are more likely to die at a younger age. And so if you look at the sex ratios in some low-income communities, they are very skewed.
There's always been a tendency, though, historically, for women to slightly marry below on their economic level, though, isn't there? So is this running counter to that then, or is women always usually marry slightly above their economic level?
Well, in general, I mean, there's a lot of homogamy. I mean, people tend to marry people like themselves.
Okay.
And so that, you know, in some ways that feeds into part of the reason why marriage is not the answer to poverty. You know, two unemployed people
Yeah, still
sharing their income.
0 plus 0 is
Right.
still 0. But let me ask you this question. The very first person I interviewed was Charles Murray, who's come out with a book called Coming Apart. And in it, he was able to, you know, and he had the math that said that if you have a college degree, people who have a college degree, their marriage rates stayed relatively stable. It's declined a couple of points. It's down to like 83%. Mm-hmm. But in the working poor, that marriage has become much the exception.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true.
And so, okay, so let's put this standpoint. If we required everybody to get a college degree, would we affect the rates of marriage? Probably not.
That's, you know, I can't see the future. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, you know, my inclination is that, you know, greater economic opportunities for low-income men and women likely would have some positive impact on marriage rates. And I mean, I think part of the issue is that, I mean, this has really become a cultural and political battleground, these issues surrounding the family, really pitting, I think, one view which believes that what we have is a culture problem, that, that low-income single mothers and their potential partners simply don't value marriage.
Okay.
And the empirical research does not support that conclusion. Researchers who have studied low-income single mothers have found that they place a high value and desire and really revere marriage in a lot of ways. But they're also very aware in really a very pragmatic kind of way of the challenges of bringing in another person to their household. And this is, you know, if you're a mother, economically disadvantaged, raising a child, bringing in another potentially economically disadvantaged person into that household can potentially have negative consequences both for you and your child.
So what's all this mean to policymakers?
Well, you know, I'm not an expert on policy, but one thing that I do know is that we have a lot of evidence in now that these marriage promotion programs have really failed spectacularly.
Like 2 or 3% success rate out of all that.
I mean, there've been some
money well spent.
There have been some very well-designed, you know, randomized interventions where some people receive the relationship skills training and others don't, and you know, they've had, to the extent that they've had any positive benefits, they've been very small, and some have even have had negative consequences.
Really?
Also very small. So I mean, my assessment is that they probably have no impact.
Okay. So I guess the question is then, does being married have an impact on your poverty? if you are unmarried, I mean, the thing that I've seen the statistic, if you become, especially for a woman, if you become pregnant in your teenage years, if you do not complete high school, and you are unmarried, you have a 95% chance of living in poverty.
The question is for women who are unmarried, become pregnant, what would their poverty rates have been for those women if they had married? We don't know that they would be any different than they are now. I mean, the issue is one of causal order. It's you know, those women who have a non-marital birth or who have a teen birth are disadvantaged to begin with and come from disadvantaged backgrounds. And so, we don't know what their outcomes would have been if they had not experienced those events.
The decline of marriage in American culture is a relatively recent phenomena, occurring sometime starting back in the 60s and 70s, and then for the working class, hit bottom and has showed little chance of coming back up. For the college educated, well, just simply called the ruling elite, it's gone like this,
Sure.
a little dip, come back up, mostly okay. About 8 out of 10 marriages survive very well. So the trying to fix poverty by going after marriage was a false promise then. So how do we fix poverty then?
Well, that is a good question. I mean, I think, we have examples from other countries, for example, where, other countries that have high rates of non-marital fertility. Sweden, other Nordic countries, and, you can look at the poverty rates of women, with children who are not married there, and they are substantially lower. Despite the fact that women in the U.S. are more likely to, single mothers in the U.S. are more likely to be employed than they are in other countries. So it's not an issue of laziness or not wanting to work. The research that's looked at this has, of course, one reason for that is government transfers, is welfare programs that bring those women in other countries, they're more likely to bring them out of poverty. But also research has found two policies that tend to be particularly helpful for low-income single mothers. And those are parental leave policies, particularly in the infant years when a child is young, that allow women to take time from the workforce and receive pay while they're doing so.
Could fathers do this too?
Yes, yes, for fathers as well. And that, in fact, could be a benefit as well, because a lot of non-marital childbearing now occurs in cohabiting unions. So if one was able to have a cohabiting partner, a man who was able to continue to work and still take care of the child, that might have positive effects for later transitioning into marriage. And then also the availability of high-quality preschool-age childcare, particularly for children under the age of 3. And these are both areas where the U.S. really stands out compared to other nations of similar...
Positively or negatively?
Negatively. We're one of the only
developed countries, OECD countries. That...
Right, exactly. That does not have widespread availability.
Structured.
Yes.
All right, you mentioned earlier about the impact on mental health. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Well, we know from research that on average, marriage is associated with better mental health. And of course, exits from marriage are associated with at least temporary declines in mental health. Now, in terms of our work on non-marital fertility, we really haven't, what we found was in terms of women, non-marital fertility is associated with negative physical health outcomes for women decades later in midlife. We're not finding any negative mental health consequences for non-marital fertility.
Okay. If you were going to describe what it is that your research has found to Bobby and Betty Buckeye, how would you describe what you have found? Why would they care about what it is that you've discovered?
Well, let's see. I mean, I think One reason is that it does have policy implications. We are continuing to spend money on these marriage promotion programs. Now, it's not a lot of money in the scope of the overall budget. However, I mean, I think there's sort of an ideological issue here too, is that you know, we are continuing to spend money on programs that are ineffective. And there's I think, an underpinning of these marriage promotion policies, which again suggests that the problem is a cultural problem, that if we can just convince poor people to value marriage, then...
So they're poor because they're culturally poor?
Well, that's the assumption,
okay.
That they don't value marriage or they don't value work. And it's not just my research, but a large body of research shows that's not the issue. You know, most people who receive welfare benefits do so for a very short period of time. People don't stay don't stay in poverty long term. It tends to be something that people move in and out of.
How do you feel about some of these more aggressive programs for after-school studies? They go all the way back to the Model Cities program out of the LBJ Great Society era. The Model Cities program was a hotbed of graft and corruption. It got blown up very appropriately. But one of the after effects of it they found was that the program of it, a very aggressive after-school intervention, was leading to a rise of a black intelligentsia, which is something then that the white power structure said, no, we don't want that, and probably pulled the plug on. But now we're seeing this being reinvented again. History seldom repeats, but often rhymes. And Nortec up in Cleveland, for example, started a very aggressive program now of this type of thing. Are you seeing that these types of programs have a true impact?
Well, I'm not familiar specifically with that program. I have seen some evidence, some evaluation of programs that people have kind of pointed to as an alternative to some of these healthy marriage initiatives, which are focused on high school students. And maybe this is what you're talking about, and have a component of job training and encouraging students to go to college and things like this. And the evaluations of those types of programs that I've looked at have shown some success. And interestingly, they've also shown higher rates of marriage among the groups who participated in these programs that are really designed to further economic mobility among youth.
Do you have any thoughts about non-marital fertility?
I guess about the prevalence, or
yeah.
Well, again, I mean, I think part of non-marital fertility has grown very rapidly. It's grown about 46% in the past 20 years.
Pardon? Can you say that again?
46% increase in rates of non-marital fertility in the past 20 years. I just pulled up the numbers for Ohio, and I believe it's grown even more rapidly. And so, in the U.S. as a whole, 41% of all births are now non-marital.
Okay.
In Ohio, I believe it's 46%.
Okay.
So it's, quickly becoming a dominant pathway to family formation. Again, I think there are multiple complex reasons for that, but the fact that we see the rates of non-marital fertility being so economically stratified. I mean, it's much higher in low-income, low-educated communities. So I think if we are concerned about non-marital fertility, I think people are, partly because of its link to poverty. I'm concerned about non-marital fertility because I've found that it's linked to, again, poorer health outcomes for women. What's the answer to that? If we want to reduce non-marital fertility, what do we do?
What do we do?
Or what do we do? Well, I think, probably a good start is to focus on reducing rates of unintended fertility. Most non-marital fertility is unintended, so these are not...
Sex education.
Right, sex education, Planned Parenthood, many programs that are currently, under attack nationally. I think, scaling back on those is probably the wrong way to go if we want to reduce.
Let me ask you this question. This looks like an ordinary ink pen. It's not. It's actually my magic wand. And I have a 55-gallon drum of pixie dust behind me to back it up, all right? I'm going to lay this over you. Dr. Kristi Williams, You can now require the Ohio General Assembly to pass any bill you want. I guarantee you the governor will sign it, and I guarantee you a majority of the Supreme Court will approve it. I can't get you unanimous consent. I'm not that powerful. But a majority Supreme Court to back you up on it. What would be the one thing you'd like to see the state of Ohio do that would help make Ohio a better place?
I mean, honestly, and I don't know the best way to do that, but I would like to see child poverty completely eliminated.
Okay.
Someone else is going to have to, I mean, whether that be direct transfers, because I think in all of these issues we have to take a long-term view. If we want to reduce rates of non-marital fertility, if we want to reduce rates of poverty in the future, that requires, you know, all of these things start influencing people at a very young age. I'm doing some research right now looking at the effects of early childhood adversity on family formation patterns. And it's clear that children who experience more stress in childhood are less likely to marry, they're more likely to have a non-marital birth, and all of these are linked can be linked to negative outcomes later. And so, you know, we have to start intervening, I think, early in the life course to improve the experience of children.
This has been Gene Krebs, and on behalf of the Center for Community Solutions, I do want to thank you for watching. We've been having a very interesting conversation here with Dr. Kristi Williams, an associate professor of sociology at The Ohio State University. And I'd like to thank her very much for being on this week's show. And please tune in next week, and we'll see you then. Thank you.
For more about the Center for Community Solutions or their publications, please visit www.communitysolutions.com.